You are listening to That Hoarder Overcome Compulsive Hoarding. I don't talk in real life about having hoarding disorder, so I talk about it on this podcast instead. And because I'm anonymous, I can talk really, really honestly. Subscribe to the podcast and find my social media links, episode transcripts, and every link that I mention at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Finally, I am not a doctor. I'm just a hoarder doing her best. So do seek professional support if and when you need it. Hey, how are you? I am well. To tide you over while I take a few weeks off over Christmas, enjoy this previous episode that I know has been popular in the past. If you want to make a storming start in January with de-hoarding, do think about coming along to a de-hoarding accountability Zoom session. There's one on the 4th of January and one on the 16th, and further dates in February and March. It would be amazing to see you there. Okay, enjoy re-listening or listening for the first time to this episode. So I am here with Jenna Overbaugh, a therapist who specialises in working with people with OCD. She is the host of the All the Hard Things podcast. She has contributed to research on hoarding, and she uses exposure and response prevention therapy with the people she works with. Jenna also has personal experience of OCD, and given the links between OCD and hoarding, I thought she would be a brilliant guest for the podcast. So Jenna, hi, how are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for having me. I think there's so much good and hopefully some good light bulbs and some knowledge that can come out of this discussion. So I really appreciate all of the work that you do, and thank you for having me.
So hoarding used to be considered to be a subtype of OCD. Now hoarding disorder is a disorder of its own. What are the connections or links between OCD and hoarding?
Yeah, great question. So, back then, several years ago, it was considered to be a subset of OCD, right? So, we would have obsessive compulsive disorder, and under that, we would have certain subtypes, right? Like contamination, harm thoughts, sexual thoughts. We would have other subtypes too. And one of those subtypes was thought to be hoarding. And there was some overlap, and just characteristically and clinically, you can see some of the overlap, right? Maybe this feeling that you're compelled to go out and acquire things, this feeling or the sense of urgency that like you have to keep and hold on to things, these kind of erroneous beliefs about the significance of belongings and how awful things will be if you have to get rid of them, so on and so forth. So you can see why there's overlap. Obviously, lots of anxiety involved if someone were to get rid of their things unexpectedly or have to get rid of their things.
I think even like checking, you've got to check the rubbish bags before you throw them out in case something has got into the bag that shouldn't have been there.
Yeah, absolutely. And OCD is the doubt disorder, right? So it always latches on to like the what if. And you can see a lot of that in hoarding and individuals who struggle with hoarding, right? So it's like, well, what if I might need that? What if I get rid of that and that makes me, a bad mom because that reminds me of my son who passed away, right? So, I think that's kind of why it made sense in some ways and why those connections were made. It's like you can see the overlap. You can see the what ifs. You can see the doubt. You can see there's this behavior that should make sense and that should be normal, right? To get rid of a newspaper or to get rid of mail or to get rid of this old T-shirt that doesn't fit anymore. But then we have this doubt creep in, right? Like, what if that is important? What if, what if, what if? And so that to me is probably a big portion of why they were connected. But yeah, from the early 90s through pretty much 2012, hoarding was thought of as an OCD subtype, but they're also significantly and consistently, there are a lot of differences. So finally, when the DSM-5 came about, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, hoarding got its own due diligence and is finally listed as its own condition. Now, it is still a related condition to OCD. So we know that a lot of times they are comorbid, a lot of times that people who a lot of times people who have hoarding disorder, they also have tendencies that are consistent with traditional OCD, that individuals who have, straightforward OCD, but not specifically struggling primarily with hoarding, they may also, be more vulnerable to those erroneous beliefs that we see in hoarding. So there's definitely some overlap, but they're also very consistently and significantly different in a lot of ways as well.
I interviewed a while ago a woman called Dr. Sharon Moraine, who had done some research into ADHD and hoarding. And she was very interested in that. And it feels similar to me in that a lot of people with ADHD have hoarding symptoms, and a lot of people who hoard have ADHD symptoms, but that doesn't mean they're the same or always connected. And it feels like that with OCD as well. You can have both, and you can have one with some of the other, but it's not necessarily there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are also, I can see the overlap there too. And there are some associated features with hoarding. So one of them is indecisiveness, right? So there's a lot of indecisiveness about like, well, I know that I don't need this, but I think I might need it. And I don't, but I don't really need it. And, there's just like this indecisiveness, right? And so surely anyone out there who struggles with ADHD or hoarding or both can relate to that. There's also this, sometimes this air of perfectionism, right? Like that they want to have it just a certain way and it has to be perfect. There's avoidance, flares of avoidance in both ADHD and hoarding. A lot of procrastination, right? Like, oh, I'll get to that tomorrow. I'll organize that tomorrow, or I'll get to that next time. I know I need to get rid of that, but I'll get rid of it next time. I need to get rid of stuff, not right now. A lot of times people more recently are thinking of hoarding as being an executive functioning kind of condition where there's a lot of difficulty planning, a lot of difficulty organizing tasks. There's high distractibility. And so everything that I just listed, right? The distractibility, avoidance, indecisiveness, difficulty planning, I'm sure we can see how those could be also very comorbid with each other.
I have a diagnosis of OCD from years and years and years ago, which I've never talked about on the podcast before, not because it's a big secret, but because it feels for me like the two are entirely unrelated. I feel like my OCD symptoms are so different to my hoarding symptoms. Is it possible, this may be too big a question or too personal a question, but is it possible to have the two in parallel but unrelated?
For sure. I think mental health is so complex, right? So
Yeah.
of course, right? Of course. Um, so yeah, I mean, there's definitely some common comorbidities like we've talked about. So 75 of people who struggle with hoarding have a comorbid mood or anxiety disorder. But the most common disorders that are comorbid with it are going to be obsessive compulsive disorder, but that only happens about 20% of the time. But within that 20% of the time that there is overlap, I would absolutely say that anything is possible. Sometimes they could inflate one another. Sometimes it might be a seesaw effect. Sometimes it's completely different. And that's just how complex the human brain can be for you.
When I was diagnosed, the psychiatrist basically said, "Oh, this is an unusual thing." And he was just fascinated by me rather than helpful about it.
Aw, that's gotta
Because
feel awful.
I know, because I have compulsions without obsessions. And so he was going, "Oh, that doesn't happen very often." And I felt like, I don't know, I was in a zoo or something.
Yeah, that's not helpful, right? And so, I think it's way more helpful to kind of have, as a professional, hopefully have that open mind, like, sure, I mean, nothing's off the table. People are complex, people are complicated. Mental health is not one size fits all. It's never what we expect. We have to be open to the fact that literally anything can happen.
Yeah. So if somebody listening recognizes themselves in your description of how OCD and hoarding can manifest or interplay, where should they start in addressing that?
So, first things first, I think the fact that they're even really like exposing themselves to this type of content and trying to get education and, you know, motivational interviewing and like the different stages of change of motivation, like pre-contemplation, contemplation, there's several other ones too. I think that shows, right, that just like you are just the fact that you are open to having these discussions and open to taking in this information shows that you are to some degree motivated to change, right? And you have some insight into the fact that this is something that you want to work on. But there are clear differences, right, between like hoarding and collecting. So obviously, hoarding is going to be where a lot of the possessions are unorganized. Collecting is just kind of these organized possessions. If someone is collecting, it's that they have a lot of pride in their possessions. They show off their collection and enjoy sharing it with others. There's a lot of satisfaction from a new possession. They've managed their money well, they budget their time well. Someone who is struggling with hoarding may hide their home, have a hard time having people over. They may be in debt. They may get lost in time, kind of shopping or organizing or gathering things. There's a lot of shame, it kind of that's experienced with that whole process. So, I mean, I think anyone out there is doing an incredible job just opening themselves up, but really identifying, something that as therapists we're always looking for is, to what extent is this causing distress and impairment in your life? So distress and impairment are really important kind of key factors when it comes to getting a diagnosis. So to what extent does this cause distress in your everyday life? To what to what degree is this causing impairment in your day-to-day functioning? As far as the criteria goes, it comes down to that persistent difficulty of getting rid of or parting with items. There's a feeling that you need to save it and it would cause too much distress to get rid of it. There's obviously also the difficulty with acquiring continually new things. So yeah, so first things first, right? And I hope that people can get help if they want to get help, right? Like I hope that they could do it hopefully in a way that's like, we call it harm reduction, right? Like we want to keep, first and foremost, we want to keep people safe. We want to make sure that that there's no papers right by the stove. We want to make sure that there are walkways. We want to make sure that the bathroom is accessible and all of that stuff. But especially if someone is feeling motivated for change, we can absolutely treat that. So as with most mental health conditions, we can't cure it. There's not like a magic pill that you can take, but there are effective interventions. The one most effective being cognitive behavioral therapy, with some psychoeducation and exposure and response prevention in there. And there's lots that can be done to really mitigate your symptoms and to try to still live a really fulfilling life.
So you yourself developed postpartum OCD. Is that something you feel comfortable talking about?
Yeah, absolutely. So, yeah, would always kind of call myself an anxious person. I remember in school, some of my earliest memories were like mostly with social anxiety in hindsight. I would get really nauseous before going to a new class, or, who am I going to sit next to in the cafeteria? What if someone calls on me and I don't know the answer? But even from a young age, I knew very early on that the only thing worse than like being called on or sitting with someone new in the cafeteria is just sitting in my own anxiety and like letting anxiety win.
Yeah.
And so even from a super early age, I would go out of my way to sit with the scariest person at lunch. I would go out of my way to raise my hand and ask the questions. And so in college, when I learned that that was actually a treatment, it's exposure and response prevention, it's an evidence-based treatment for OCD and anxiety, and somewhat what we use for hoarding as well. I just loved it. I fell in love with it. But when I had my son back in 2018, he's 4.5 now. I really struggled with harm intrusive thoughts, with sexual intrusive thoughts, thoughts that we don't want to have that are completely incongruent with our sense of self. And that was really devastating. It was completely debilitating. I didn't know how after my maternity leave I would return to work. It got to the point where I was suicidal. I had some suicidal ideation in there. I wanted to roll out of a moving vehicle, was always kind of my intention and plan. And eventually, luckily, a year and a half later, so even therapists wait long to go to therapy. It's scary for us too. We're not always the best at taking our own advice. But yeah, I luckily was able to get into a therapist and went through my own cognitive behavioral therapy experience. And oh my gosh, it's been so helpful. I'm a better mom for it. I'm a better therapist for it. And it's still something that every day I have to work on, right? Like even this morning, as I'm getting ready with my son and I'm changing his diaper and like getting him ready for school and stuff, I'm like, there's still intrusive thoughts, man. There's still intrusive thoughts there, but I don't give in to them. I don't let anxiety rule my day anymore. And I can just roll with it so much better.
And before you got help yourself, Had you diagnosed yourself as a therapist, or were you so kind of immersed in it that you didn't know what was going on?
So I think that as most people out there who have OCD and probably other conditions too, we always find a reason to believe that it's not like that oh yeah, everyone else has OCD but not me. Right? Like I'm just being a bad mom, right?
Yeah.
Like I'm just awful. I'm just going crazy. I'm just losing my mind. Um and that's the doubt disorder again for you, right? It's like, oh yeah, I know exactly I meet all of this criteria, but I'm just a bad mom. Like I just can't get it together. And it's really sad, like when you're in the depths of mental health like that you just can't see things clearly and you don't give yourself the compassion that you would give somebody else. So in hindsight, 100%, I should have diagnosed myself. But I think that's why I didn't get help for the longest time is because it's like I was not giving myself the compassion that I would have given a friend. I was like, no, I'm just a bad mom. I'm just a bad mom for having these thoughts.
I imagine, especially when it's tied in with parenting, the tendency to blame yourself or to not admit to things is probably even stronger because there's suddenly, I'm not a parent, but I know enough parents to know that the world suddenly starts judging you for everything.
Everything.
The way you feed your baby, whether you go to work, whether you don't go to work, you know, there's nothing that mums especially can do right in many ways. So I imagine it feels very difficult to say, I'm struggling with these thoughts that are quite horrible.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think with OCD, right? Like so many of us, there's this misrepresentation and this misunderstanding that it's just about contamination and that it's just about having things be perfect and orderly and symmetrical and all of that. And those cases can be debilitating. They definitely exist and they can be debilitating. So I don't want to take away from that, but it's the taboo things that no one talks about, right? So it's not that it doesn't exist, it's just that people aren't talking about it. There's not a media TV outlet that wants to highlight sexual intrusive thoughts as their main character. Someone with contamination, sure, it's easier to talk about. But yeah, I mean, so many women out there, the vast majority of women and new parents in general experience unwanted intrusive thoughts, but they just sit in silence. They suffer in silence because there's this fear of like, oh my gosh, like no one else is talking about it. So it must just be me. If I say that to someone, they're going to think I'm crazy. They're going to think I'm a bad parent. They're going to think that I'm not enjoying and loving every moment like everyone says we should. And I mean, even my doctor, when I went to my doctor, who knew that I was an expert in OCD and I was very well known in my small little community for being an OCD specialist. You'd think that if I went to a doctor and told her about my intrusive thoughts, that she'd take me seriously. But she kind of joked with me. She kind of said, like, huh, welcome to new motherhood, like where you're anxious for no reason. And I was like, that's not cool. Like, that's not okay. Like, I'm not okay with living my life that way. Like, and like I know myself. Like I know that this is not normal. And so I like was I'll never forget that. And I did advocate for myself, luckily. But how many women aren't? Like how many women aren't able and don't feel confident enough or knowledgeable enough to be able to say like, no, this isn't just new motherhood. I'm really struggling. I want to roll out of a moving vehicle. I need help now. Like how many women just take that from their trusted doctor and are like, okay, I guess this is my life now. Like it's awful to think about that.
Yeah, I have a friend who, when she first had her baby, she'd gone for a walk with the baby and was at the top of a hill and thought, if I let go now, the baby will roll down the hill and end up in the traffic at the
Yeah.
bottom. And she couldn't, she wasn't going to let go, but she couldn't shake off this thought. And
Yeah.
for her, it was a one off. It didn't stick, it didn't happen again. But it was so strong and powerful for her that even that single experience of it, when to some degree she knew it wasn't rational, there was no reason she was going to let go of the
Hmm.
baby. But if that's happening day in, day out,
For sure.
it's exhausting.
And so you're bringing up so many awesome points here. So research shows that no matter where you're at in the world, no matter what your mental health background is, your socioeconomic status, people have intrusive thoughts. they've actually done research to show that if we get someone who has OCD and someone who does not have OCD, and we ask both of them for 2 weeks to write down all of their intrusive thoughts, that you can't discern at the end of the 2 week period of who has OCD and who doesn't. So
Wow.
it just goes to show that like we all have the same thoughts. Like there are other moms out there who had all the same types of thoughts that I had, but where people with OCD go a little bit different is that they tend to think that those thoughts are significant somehow. They interpret those thoughts as being significant. So, while your friend was able to kind of have that thought, notice it, and let it go, it was obviously distressing to some degree. Someone who's more vulnerable and has like that sticky brain might interpret significance from that thought like, I just had that thought. What does that mean about me? What does that mean about me that I had that thought? That must mean that I'm a horrible parent. The fact that I had that thought must somehow mean that I want to do that. Why did I have that thought? And people with OCD, they tend to want to control the thoughts, right? Like, oh my gosh, don't think that thought again. Don't think that thought again. No matter what you do, do not think that thought again. And you can imagine, right, that they may never go near heels again. They may never walk their baby again. They may never go outside with their baby.
Yeah.
And you can see how, like, it's that fork in the road situation. So the problem is not the intrusive thought. The problem is whether or not we interpret it as being significant. And as someone who has OCD, it's really hard, especially when it latches onto something that you value. And as a new mom, there's so much stress anyway. It is just a petri dish for you to have these thoughts stick. So yeah, that's such a great example.
I think something that OCD and hoarding have in common, not clinically, but societally, I guess, is that they're both used in conversation by people who don't know. Someone says, oh, I'm so OCD. I'm so OCD. I've got to tidy up my desk because I'm
Right.
so OCD. Or, oh, I didn't throw away that thing. I'm such a hoarder. And it's miles off. And that means, certainly when I got the OCD diagnosis, I was like, but I don't particularly wash my hands a lot. Like
Yeah.
that was my understanding of what OCD was. It was washing your hands a lot. Whereas what I do is it's all in my head. I put everything
Right.
in alphabetical order. And because of that lack of, well, it's not even the lack of public knowledge, it's the misuse of
Mhm.
one feature of something, I guess, that gets into popular culture and means that people don't really understand the bigger picture.
Yeah. And I think people mean well. It's a total naivety thing. It's just it's just, well-intentioned ignorance. And that's why advocacy is so important. It's like in order to really get the word out there about what OCD is, I think we need to have more of these like brutal conversations about like, yeah, OCD is actually thinking that, that you may like, did I actually need to tuck my son's penis down in his diaper? I mean, he is 4.5. Do I really need to be doing that right now? Or did you like to do that? Like,
Right.
but people don't want to talk about that, right? But by me saying it, someone else listening might be like, oh my gosh, I thought that I was the only one. And that's like the spark. That's the spark that I want people to get is like, oh my gosh, like I'm not crazy. I'm not like this quote unquote disgusting person. I'm not like the odd one out who just has these really ridiculous thoughts. Like other people have those thoughts too. And it's so good to know that you're not alone. It's like these are the most isolating kinds of conditions. They're so full of shame, so full of guilt. It's just really terrible. So knowing that you're not alone is really important.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting that you were a therapist first and then
Yeah.
developed OCD because you hear a lot of somebody who has some experience with mental ill health of some kind and then goes into becoming a therapist. And so has your own experience with OCD affected your practice, affected the way you
Oh
treat
my gosh.
people?
100%. So, and I totally recognize that. And I think that just goes to show that no one is immune from this, right? Like I started studying and working just with people who have OCD and related conditions, including hoarding, starting in 2008. I had my son in 2018.
Right.
So I had been working, I'd spoken at national conferences, I had been a published author. Like I was working in the #1 residential facility for OCD, anxiety, and hoarding at Rogers Memorial Hospital here in the United States in Wisconsin. I had some pretty good experience under my belt. And so I remember even when I was like super pregnant, and I remember thinking, like I'm a first time mom, I handle stress okay. Maybe I would be susceptible to postpartum depression or, some anxiety or things like that. But OCD, no way. Like I would never ask my husband to do anything for me because of anxiety. I would never check my son in the middle of the night. I would never do that. And I remember my very first intrusive thought. And like I said, I've always been anxious, right? I've always been like an anxious person. I would have said, in the past, I probably would have met criteria for social anxiety or generalized anxiety disorder. But this was different. This was an intrusive thought that came out of nowhere. Like, and a lot of people who have OCD, not always, but they can almost like bring it back to that specific thought. Like the thought that broke their brain is a lot of times how we describe it. For me, it was I was in my bedroom. My husband and me were there. I was changing my now newborn son. He was 3 weeks old, and I was putting socks on him, and I had this intrusive thought, like, what if I just snapped his ankles?
Right.
Like, and then I had this intrusive thought, like, what does that mean about me? Like, does that mean that I would want to do that? Like, can I be trusted to change his clothes when I'm a little bit frustrated or angry? And I was like, I remember backing away, like with my hands up like this and just saying like, no, I'm not doing that. And I backed away and I made my husband put on the socks. And soon enough, it was not just socks, it was pants, and then it was shirts, and then it was coats, and then it was diapers, and then it was just so many other things. It eventually got so bad. I started, as most new parents do experience, I started to, get really sleep deprived, wasn't taking good physical care of myself. And I started to worry. And I so sleep deprived that I bashed his head in and I don't remember. And I would check his body for hours. I would undress him and check every fold and every crevice and every angle of his head. And then I would put him down. And by the time that I got back to my bed on the opposite side of the house, I would say, wait, am I so sleep deprived? Did I just dream that? And I would have to go back and do it all over again. And it got to the point where I was waking up my husband in the middle of the night to do it for me, because I was like, well, at least like he can do it. He's not as sleep deprived as me. I trust him more than I trust myself. And I was like, yeah. So there I am. And then in comes the shame and guilt, because I'm like, I know I shouldn't be doing this. Why am I doing this? Like, I know exactly what this is. I should not be doing these things. But what kept coming up for me was the stakes are too high. Like, the stakes are too high. I don't care if I'm giving into a ritual right now. I am checking to make sure that my baby is okay. Like, I don't freaking care. And I finally got it. I remember, and I'm not a super religious person, but I remember begging and negotiating with God. Like, I will never like gaslight or like misunderstand or like, I don't know what the right word is, but like I will never underestimate someone else's suffering with OCD. Like, if you just take this from me, I will never again underestimate like how bad someone is struggling, because I used to get so frustrated. Like, you shouldn't ritualize. Why are you doing it? But here I was, right? Like 10 years of experience under my belt, and I'm asking my husband to go and check my son. And so I remember pleading with God, like, please, if you just take this from me, I won't underestimate this ever again. And so obviously went through my own therapy and everything like that. And thank goodness. But yeah, I went back after my maternity leave and I was so much more compassionate. I got it for the first time. I freaking got it. Like, I really got it. But I also knew that like you kind of have to hit that bottom, right? Like, you have to get to the point where like I can't keep living my life this way anymore. I'm willing to sit with those doubts. I'm willing to sit with that anxiety. I'm willing to do literally whatever it takes so that I don't continue to have to live my life this way. So 100%, it has changed everything for me. And mostly I remember a flashbulb memory. I remember a year and a half into my son being born. He was a year and a half old. And I remember struggling so badly. And I remember looking outside of my front door and just thinking like, if I'm struggling so badly, if I'm struggling with OCD so bad and I have all the context for it, I know exactly what's going on. I know that I'm not alone. I know that these are just intrusive thoughts and are not necessarily going to happen. And I have all that context. How are women not like killing themselves, really?
Yeah.
Like, it's crazy to me because I was so debilitated by it. but I had all the knowledge in the world. Like, what about people who are out there who don't have that knowledge? It was just super heartbreaking. So that's when I started my podcast, my Instagram, and I was like, I have to reach moms however I can.
And so presumably at least some of your clients know that you have experience of it yourself.
Yeah. And I mean, it could go either way. Like, I thought that it would go either way, but like, people are usually so much more trusting of me because they know that I've been there and they know that I am not just like applying these rules to them without
Yeah.
having done it myself. So I feel like it helps with credibility for sure. And yeah, I mean, when I can say that, like, I know now kind of what it is that they're going through when they know that they shouldn't be doing something, but the stakes are just too high because I've been there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. So you work with exposure and response prevention therapy. I have a regular guest on the podcast who is a therapist who works with acceptance and commitment therapy.
Mhm.
I've had CBT. So we've talked about both of those before. We've talked about EMDR before, but I know nothing about exposure and response prevention therapy. It's quite hard to say. Um, can you explain what it is, first of all?
Yeah, absolutely. So, exposure and response prevention is the gold standard treatment. Kind of what that means is that it's the most backed by evidence. It has tons of empirical support backing it. It is essentially exposure and response prevention is essentially a two-part problem to a two-part solution to a two-part problem. So, with OCD, we have the obsessions and we have the compulsions. The obsessions are those intrusive ideas, thoughts, images, impulses, or feelings or commands. Whereas the compulsions are the things either mentally or physically that you feel compelled to do, to go out of your way to do, to feel better about that. And so exposure and response prevention is our gradual, but still it's challenging. We try to make it manageable though. It's our gradual approach of one, gradually helping that person go a little bit more and more outside of their comfort zone. Two, reducing and ultimately trying to resist those compulsions or safety behaviors that they would typically have done. And then three, reducing avoidance. So, exposure, we have them and we come up with assignments and ways to systematically and gradually have them evoke their fears. For me, an exposure was I had to put socks on my son. I had to put my son to bed and, have that visual in my mind that there could be a big gash in his head and not go check, right? That I had to put the socks on my son and not be super careful or have my husband right there watching just to be sure. So there's this exposure element where you're doing the scary thing. And then you also have to resist the response that you're typically used to doing. So, yeah. But we tend to be a little bit more general. There's other skills that come into play when we're talking about hoarding. We do more, cognitive behavioral therapy, addressing these erroneous beliefs around needing to save and acquiring more and all that stuff. But there is still an exposure component, exposure and response prevention, where, yeah, I mean, in a way that's challenging but manageable, the exposures would be to get rid of stuff, to throw stuff away, to recycle things, to donate items. We may have people, as far as exposures go, maybe go for like shopless shopping, like where we just kind of like walk around and we don't go shopping. Where people go to like garage sales and they're not able to get things. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that you can do for that, but it's all about exposing yourself, allowing yourself to feel that discomfort, and eventually realizing that that discomfort is not dangerous. It's uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous, and that I can handle it, right? So that a good exposure might be if someone was fearful of, let's say their son passed away and they're afraid of like getting rid of an old t-shirt of his. I might say, you know what, like if it's too hard for us to just throw that away, let's see, how would you feel if I held on to that for the next 24 hours? Let's just see how that feels for you. So it's really just, testing these. I think of them like behavioral experiments. Let's just see what happens. And usually they're able to cope. Usually things are not as awful as they expect them to be, and they're much more able to cope than they thought that they were.
I'm thinking of things like if you have a bag of things to donate to a charity shop or something like that, and you think, I'm going to put it in the car now, and then tomorrow I will donate it. And the exposure is kind of putting it in the car and leaving it there. And you're then need to prevent yourself from the response that might be, oh, I'll just go and check. There's
Yes.
nothing in there that I really want to keep hold of.
Yep. Yep.
Maybe I've changed my mind about that. Is it that
hmm
kind of thing?
Yeah. And we want to do it though in a way that's challenging but manageable, right? So there might be some people out there listening who are like, oh my gosh, I could never do that. Well, what if we might have to start with just talking about throwing away things? We might have to just throw away a single sheet of paper that you've inspected first, right? Like, okay, I'm going to get 30 seconds to inspect it and then I have to throw it away. We might have you like throw away junk mail without bringing it into the house, right? There's obviously some more, challenging things that you could do, like throwing away more sentimental things. But so there's definitely ways to make it manageable. But yeah, I mean, absolutely. Another tactic that people do is it's called like 4 boxes. So essentially, that you get 4 boxes, you get 1 box to keep, 1 box to throw away, 1 box to recycle, and 1 box to donate. And you don't get a new box until you've filled all 4 of them. So, like,
Okay.
you're going to get like a lot in the keep box, probably, but you don't get another keep box until you've filled up the donate, recycle, and throw away box. And there's other little things that people can do too, like as they're like on their recovery journey, right? Like having like a shredder, right when you get in the door, right? Like automatically, like magazines, junk mail, it automatically goes in the shredder. We just don't even keep it. Like we don't even look it. We don't even go through all that stuff. um you might have to have kind of like a daily time each day to like sort through items. You might need to enlist kind of a professional organizer to assist in just maintaining everything. You might need to There's also some like family promises that might have been made, right? Like grandkids, right? Like you can see the grandkids once you get your house cleaned. Well, then the promises need to be fulfilled, right? Like if I've cleaned my house, then we need to make sure that family is holding up to their end of the bargain. But then we would also obviously work on challenging the hoarding, right? Like, do you need this or do you just really want it?
Yeah.
Right? What will be the benefits of actually acquiring this? What would be the disadvantages of acquiring this? Like I said, we might do, some garage sales or some yard sales without actually stopping and buying anything. And you'd have to make rules too for that ongoing recovery, right? So, how much is okay to acquire? What's like a monthly budget or a weekly budget? What is okay to acquire? What gets thrown out immediately? Like I don't even get to inspect it anymore. So there's lots of things that can be done. There's lots of hopefulness out there. Absolutely.
I'm a big believer in if you have a whole house to de-hoard and you get to a pile of things that is just too difficult, like it might be the really sentimental stuff or the
Right.
thing that, whatever it is that you personally find the hardest, if you've got the rest of your house still to do, go to an easier bit and do that first.
Totally.
And it sounds like that's a similar approach. You're not throwing people in with the hardest exposure there is. You're starting them in a place where they won't be too overwhelmed. They may feel overwhelmed, but it's kind of progressive.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we don't want to throw anybody into the deep end. The whole mantra here is challenging but manageable. And I would say for probably most people, it's the sentimental stuff that's going to be the absolute hardest. So yeah, I mean, we use where I work, we do a scale of 0 to 10. So like on a scale of 0 to 10, how difficult would it be for you to throw away this item? How difficult would it be? Well, then it would, if that was maybe a 7, well, how difficult would it be for you to recycle it or to donate it? Sometimes it's easier to donate than to just completely throw it out.
Yeah.
Um, so that's an option too. But yeah, I mean, it is always going to be uncomfortable. If it was easy to get rid of this stuff, then you would have already done it. So don't wait for things to be 100% a sigh of relief and feel good about it, because that's not going to happen. Anything that's different from your status quo is going to feel a little bit anxiety provoking and awkward. But, I would keep your eye on the prize too, right? Like, what are the things that you want to do instead of being in the clutter, right? Like wanting to spend time with family, wanting to spend time doing other valued activities. Because a lot of times people are like, well, what would I do instead? Right? Like, what would I do instead? And there's so many other things that they can do, right?
Yeah.
So it's thinking about, you get to see your family again. You get to work on the garden. You get to get new carpeting. You get to fix some of those appliances. Maybe you would volunteer more, do the things that you value. So yeah, really remembering that pain and that discomfort is temporary. And yeah, that's why I love little exposures. Like, well, what if you just give it to me for 24 hours? Like, let's see if you actually do miss it that much. Let's see if you do forget your child who passed away, even after you give it to me for 24 hours. Because usually it feels very dangerous to get rid of those items. But once they've like temporarily given it away, they realize it actually feels good, like that they're making good progress, and they're a little bit more motivated to get rid of it permanently.
I do think often imagining it feels or can feel worse than actually doing it.
Totally.
I think I was just testing myself a bit. I had this old tin that had I think someone had given me a tin of chocolates or something like that. And I'd had this tin around for years, and I would sometimes keep things in it and sometimes wouldn't. And it had got quite battered and it wasn't pretty, but it was occasionally useful. And I thought, what if I got rid of that tin? And I immediately was going, well, it is kind of useful in this situation, and it's kind of
Right.
useful in this situation. But I also thought it is kind of useful, but I have no particular attraction to it. I don't feel attached to it. I just feel like it's useful. And I wonder what that will be like if I get rid of it.
Mm-hmm.
And
And we can come up with a usefulness for anything, right? Like
absolutely.
a broken frisbee. Like we could donate that to the local art studio and they could make a mosaic out of it.
Exactly. Yeah.
But come on, right? Like, so if we allow ourselves, we can come up with another use for anything, but we also have to take a look at what is, right? Like what is that my life has become, and the areas in my home have become unlivable because of the totality of all of these things. And the reality is, if I want to meet my goals, I have to make some of these decisions. And some of those
Yeah.
decisions are going to be resulting in us getting rid of things. So yeah, like the broken frisbee. Yeah.
Yeah.
Someone could take that and make it into like a mosaic in an art class. The world also will go on if they don't get that.
That's
Right.
it. And so I did throw away the tin. And
Good.
I know, and it has been absolutely fine. A couple of times I've needed a container and I've thought, oh, that tin would have worked, but I haven't felt particular regret even in those moments. It's just been like, oh, that tin would have worked, but what do I still have that could
Right.
work
And it's
as
like,
well?
we all do that, right?
Yeah.
Like there's always, the reality is that sometimes we make mistakes.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're big, sometimes they're really small and, easily fixable. But we also, yeah, I mean, if this is something that people want to change, the reality, like you can't have it both ways, right? Like you can't keep everything and get rid of everything at the same time. There's got to be some compromise there.
And for me, I'm sure that because I didn't feel any particular attachment to it, that made it 1,000 times easier. Had
Right.
it been like a letter from a departed loved one, it would have been a much bigger decision. And the regret, it was like you were saying earlier, the stakes feel a lot higher than an old chocolate tin.
And being compassionate with yourself with that too, right? Like I by no means struggle with hoarding disorder, but I feel like as part of the human condition, right? Like those sentimental items are harder to get rid of
They
than
are.
objective trash, right? Objective things that we have no use for. So, we all, as part of human nature, we attach emotional meaning to certain things. I have a whole room in my downstairs basement of like my son's first like infant outfits and stuff like that. And I have erroneous beliefs too that like one day I'll give them to his kids and one day, I'll take pictures with it. And it's like I will probably never do those things, but it's also not impacting my life. It's also not super distressing. And if it is distressing and impeding someone's life, then they can start to make decisions. And it doesn't have to start with the sentimental stuff. Wouldn't
Yeah.
even go there. I would start with like the junk mail. I would start with the like hazards too, right? So I would like start with like harm reduction. So making sure that like the bathroom is accessible, making sure that you have a place to sit, making sure that there's no fire hazards, making sure that nothing is on the staircase, making sure if there is a fire, you have a walkway. Really just thinking about priorities, and the sentimental items, they don't even need to be thought about for a long time, if ever, right? Like it's about sometimes just like getting some of your house back.
Absolutely. I really agree. It's so interesting to get your perspective. It's really helpful. If people want to find you online, where can they do so?
So I live primarily over on Instagram. I'm at Jenna.Overbaugh on Instagram. As you mentioned, I also have my own podcast called All the Hard Things, anywhere where podcasts are. And then if anyone is needing special services for hoarding, we do offer treatment for hoarding also. We're at www.treatmyocd.com. If anybody out there is looking for a therapist, you can ask if I'm available. I would love to work with some of you on this. I really love helping people with this, especially when they're open to it, right? If you're thinking about wanting help, then we can absolutely help you because the evidence is out there, the treatments are out there, and we can help you get to a better place of functioning. So between Instagram, my podcast, and treatmyocd.com, hopefully those are some really good resources for people out there who are listening.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. I really appreciate talking to
Thank
you.
you. It was really nice to talk with you.
Do you have any burning questions you'd love me to answer? I'll get to the top tip in a second, but my first Q&A episode was really popular, so I'm going to be open to questions on a rolling basis, and then when I have enough, I'll make another episode answering them. Contact me on Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, Reddit, YouTube, or plain old email. All the links are on my website at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. Ask me anything and I will do my best to answer it. Now, your top tip. So my top tip this week is a quote from the ever wonderful Maya Angelou. And she says, "Do the best you can until you know better. Then, when you know better, do better." Okay, thank you for listening, and I will speak to you next time. Thank you for listening to the Overcome Compulsive Hoarding podcast. You can find more online at overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk. You can find me on Twitter at ThatHoarder and on Facebook at Overcome Compulsive Hoarding with That Hoarder. To find out more about how you can support this podcast and the overall project, go to overcomecompulsivehoarding.co.uk/support and do subscribe to this podcast so you make sure you don't miss any future episodes.